My dad just passed away and now my narcissist sister wants all of his money, except she doesn't know that he didn't trust her and cut her out of his will completely. I, 35, have a sister who I'll call Margot, 32, who is possibly the most self-absorbed, narcissistic little witch in the state. And if I told you what state that was, you'd realize she has some stiff competition. She's been like that ever since we were little kids, and it of course got worse when she hit those ever so terrible teens. Most people grow out of their selfishness when their brains fully develop in their mid-20s, but for my sister I guess that just didn't happen. And I was hoping that by the time she hit 30 things would have settled down, but it's just been an ongoing series of bad relationships that seem to implode after a few months, always in the most epically dramatic fashion. And of course it's never her fault. How it could always be the guy's fault that she cheated on him or wrecked his car or racked up $10,000 on his credit card bill is still a mystery to me, but that's Margot's life for you. How she operates it is one big mystery to the rest of us. And by the rest of us, I only mean my dad and I. But now that dad is gone, it's just her and I. Our mom died when we were little, you see, so when dad got sick, I really didn't take it very well. He was actually the biggest comfort to me in the end. Much more than my sister. I'd never seen someone so brave and accepting of his fate. It made me less afraid of when my time came. But it seemed like my sister could have cared less. Of course I know that's not true. She loved my dad, and maybe she just had no way to communicate her emotions. Or maybe I'm just giving her too much credit. But she didn't cry at the funeral, and looked at her phone no less than 9 times during the service. I made sure to count. So maybe I am just deluding myself as to my sister's true feelings. But she had to have loved him, right? Who doesn't love their dad? That is, unless he's a bona fide, major league a-hole, which our dad most definitely was not. One thing I know for sure is that Margot loves money. She always has. Even in high school, she always gravitated towards the guys who had a lot of it. She always needed the finest things. The fanciest cars and finest, most up-to-date fashion. I guess it annoyed me even more, how she is, because my wife Anna is nothing like her. Not that I'd ever be interested in marrying my sister, but I married my wife partly because she's a good hang. My sister is most definitely not a good hang. I have friends who are basically best buddies with their sisters. They drink beer with them and watch football, and playfully tease each other about childhood trauma. There's definitely none of that with Margot and I. I mean, there's no playful teasing. There's plenty of childhood trauma. I think part of Margot's fascination with money came from her obsession with comparing herself to her peers. While Margot may be a flaming hot narcissist, she's not dumb. She's actually insanely intelligent, even though she uses it for the worst ways possible. While it did not do her much good in her adult years, it afforded her a scholarship to a private high school. But going to school with a bunch of kids who parked their $80,000 BMWs next to her old Honda Beater started to really mess with her mind. She started bullying my dad about how much money he made, even though he did fine and we were well taken care of. My dad was a factory worker at the GM plant, and while that may not sound glamorous, back in the day that was more than enough to take care of a family of 3. Things have definitely changed in that department. But the thing is, my dad was smart. Like, really smart. That's where Margot gets it from. I honestly don't feel like I'm half as smart as them, but dad always said I got my mom's looks. Margot certainly didn't. But the thing about my dad is, he could have gone to MIT or Stanford and majored in advanced mathematics. He definitely had the brain for it, but it certainly didn't have the money or station in life. He was born on the wrong side of the tracks, and it was nearly impossible for a kid like him to get ahead with his education. Which is why he always stressed the importance of it with us. When we were kids, every other year around July, right in the dead of summer, Dad would take a 1 or 2 week vacation. We'd stay with Aunt Sally, which we loved to do, and he and his brother Bill would pack up Bill's old camper and go out west, drive around, camp, hike, do the whole brotherly bonding thing. At least that's what I thought they were doing. But it turns out, that was just the cover story. It was as close to a deathbed confession that my dad was ever going to get, mostly because he hadn't done anything bad in his life. Except for this. My dad and Bill had somehow developed a detailed method of cheating at blackjack. It was a 2-man operation involving counting cards and a series of cues and signals between them. They first started talking about it when they were sitting in the delivery waiting room while my mom was in labor with Margot. But the plan was enacted for the first time until after my mom's death, on their first few trips out there. They started at some of the Native American casinos on the ways to Nevada, and moved on to Reno once they felt confident. After some serious early success, they started hitting up Vegas, and before they knew it, they amassed a small fortune. They went on these trips probably about 7 or 8 times before he decided he had enough to invest with. I guess it wasn't about the thrill of winning for my dad, although there's no doubt that he enjoyed it. But over time, he ended up turning those gambling winnings into $8 million. When he told me, I nearly ended up in a hospital bed myself. The thing was though, he swore me to secrecy. He said that when he first started, it was to build up enough money that if anything happened to him, we'd be okay. But things just kind of snowballed from there. He didn't trust Margot with the money, however. As she grew into adulthood, he realized that she was who she was, and that isn't changing. I think he carried a lot of guilt over that, but I told him he did the best he could with us, and he truly did. He passed on not long after, leaving me with 2 tons of heartache, $8 million, and a serious problem. How could I possibly hide this from Margot? I wanted to honor my father's wishes, but they were totally impractical. I mean, I'd have to spend some of it at some point. Not to sound like an entitled jerk, but what's the point of having inherited $8 million if you can't spend any of it? Well, it wouldn't take long for that problem to get taken care of by a lawyer with a big mouth. His name was Mr. Johnson, and when Mr. Johnson had been given specific instructions by my father to not read certain parts of the will out loud to my sister, he must have had a few drinks beforehand or have zero short-term memory, because literally the first thing to come out of his weird mouth was "Congratulations, Margot, you're now a millionaire." I think Mr. Johnson was trying to flirt with my sister, and I'm sure it had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he thought she was now newly loaded. But the problem was, my dad didn't leave Margot a million of anything. If Mr. Johnson had bothered to read all the way down to the bottom, he would have seen that she was to be given $25,000 and half of his house. She seemed as shocked as I was when I heard. She looked at me, looking for signs in my face that said I knew, but I was so shocked that Johnson had blabbed, she had trouble deciphering the difference. Dad hadn't told Mr. Johnson how he'd made his millions, so there was no way he could answer any of Margot's questions as to where it came from. And because of my promise to my dad, I was simply forced to play dumb about the whole thing. Margot begged me to have lunch with her after, and we literally went to the most expensive restaurant in town. I guess she figured that now she could afford it. She grilled me for over an hour about what I did or didn't know about Dad's fortune, and I was proud to say that I held up to his questioning. At least I did that day. But as time wore on, keeping everything a secret became more and more difficult. For one, Margot started hounding Mr. Johnson about the money. Where was it? When was it going to be released to her? And without a good answer for her, she was beginning to become hostile. He finally came to me terrified. He actually showed up at my home and told me that he thought she'd been following him and going through his mail. I honestly thought that was a little bit paranoid, especially the mail part. But I don't know, Margot was capable of some very extreme acts. And maybe this is exactly why Dad didn't want her to have a cent of his money. But that was easier said than done, because it meant being totally honest with my sister about everything, and breaking my dad's promise. I mean, I guess I could have just lied even more, but I honestly don't feel like my dad would have wanted that. I'm not even sure he was thinking clearly when he told me to not tell her. He was definitely on a smorgasbord of heavy drugs. And how long could I really keep this love going away? I decided that it was finally time to tell her. Number 1, I couldn't keep this lie going forever. Number 2, Mr. Johnson was now stalking me to get her to stop stalking him. And number 3, I wanted to buy a freaking boat. And honestly I felt like I deserved it after all of this crap I've gone through. My dad being sick was hard on me. Him dying was worse. And my sister being, my sister, is just an ongoing misery I need to escape. Maybe a long vacation with my wife is actually what I need. An island vacation. Or maybe buying a boat and sailing to an island, far away from Margot and all of her problems. I went over to her apartment one day, surprised her like she and Mr. Johnson are so fond of doing themselves. She said she was just about to get in the shower, that she had just gotten back from a workout and was going out on a date that night. It was a first date with some guy named Rodney who sold car stereo equipment, and she was annoyingly enthused about it. She kept saying that he was like, the coolest guy ever, and that she thought he could definitely be the one. I told her that was ridiculous, that she hadn't even gone out on a date with the guy yet, but she said that sometimes a girl just knows about these things and that I just wouldn't understand. Whatever. I told her there was something important I needed to talk to her about, and that I could come back after she was done slopping the greasy makeup on her face, but she demanded I stay and tell her. That's the thing about Margot, she needs everything right now. If you give her a taste of some unknown knowledge, time in her world until she knows it. So, I sat her down and told her calmly and coolly every fact from start to finish, her feelings be damned. It may seem cruel of me, but I honestly just don't have any time for any of her overly dramatic BS. Dad never would have stood for it in his younger and healthier years, and I'm getting too old for it anyway myself. So I told her everything. I told her what the will actually said, and that Mr. Johnson was probably just some weirdo money-grubbing creep, and most importantly, that Dad wanted me to have the money, all of it. Well, as you can guess, she didn't take it well. But what I didn't expect her to do was simply deny reality entirely. She said that none of what I said was true. I was a liar, that I was messing with her mind, trying to gaslight her, etc. etc. I told her that all of my story can be backed up facts, and that if she can talk to Mr. Johnson without terrifying him, maybe she'd accept it. She outright refused and told me that I was a lying poss, and then stormed out of her house with half of her makeup, got in her car and sped off. I have no idea where she went, but I know that her date didn't end up happening. Concerned about her manic state of mind, I stayed at the house and waited for her. She isn't answering her phone, but I remembered that she mentioned this Rodney guy was going to be picking her up at 8. I figured she wouldn't miss that, no matter how upset she was about losing $8 million, but I guess I once again foolishly underestimated the power of wealth. Because when 8 o'clock rolled around, so did Rodney and his souped-up Chevelle, but my sister Margot was still nowhere in sight. And that was a week ago today. No one's heard from her, no one's seen her, and no one has any freaking idea where she is. I filed a missing persons report as soon as I was able to, but based on my story, the cops said she seems to have left of her own free will. I was going to say how this is nothing like her, how out of character this is, and how no one saw this coming. That's what everyone else is saying. But honestly, running away from all of her problems almost seems like the logical conclusion for Margot. I'm sure she'll be back. I doubt she has enough in her savings to take her very far, and she's not resourceful enough to start over all by herself in a new place. And it's also ridiculous, because in the end, I'm sure we could have worked out some type of arrangement money-wise. I mean, yes, I want to follow my dad's wishes, but this is by far the last thing he would have wanted. I know my sister has her problems, but I do want to see her again, and I hope she finds her way back home soon. Update. So, it's been 3 days and I'm happy to say that Margot is now back home, safe and sound. She was found all the way in Colorado, arrested for public intoxication. She claimed to be hitchhiking to Las Vegas to make enough money to sue her brother. So as you can see, even though she's home, things aren't so great between us. But there's nothing else I can do now. They put her on a 48-hour involuntary psychiatric hold and shipped her back here, and now a judge and social worker are going to figure out what to do with her. So I guess my dad was right after all. Giving her any of that money, at least at this point in her life, would have been a complete and total disaster. It doesn't mean she won't get any of it someday, and I'm willing to work with her, but she has to be willing to work on herself first. So now I'm here, $8 million richer, which is almost $8 million richer than I was before. My wife and I have already discussed it, and we're going to sit on it for a while, make some investments. We aren't going to move or anything like that. We'll just make improvements on the house that we've been meaning to do for years. Although we did both agree to both doing one thing extravagant for ourselves, and one thing together. My wife decided on a Mercedes for herself. I wasn't a fan of her driving a German car, but it was her extravagance. And mine of course was the boat I always wanted. And together we sailed it to the little island of our dreams, which I'm not going to tell you the name of, just in case Margot finds out. Go into mom's death story later.